It's late at night, and a veil of darkness has enveloped the sleepy city of Saitama. But while all the residents have drifted away in peaceful slumber, one man slaves away through the midst of night in a manic desire to craft a World Cup victory. So when Isagi describes Jinpachi Ego as the one person who believes wholeheartedly that Japan can win the World Cup against the backdrop of a starry night, the framing of the panel casts Ego as a beacon in the dark, the sole light of hope for a nation that had long put its dreams to bed. And by visual symbolism alone, the manga makes it clear that Ego's efforts will not be in vain. As the new and improved Yoichi Isagi opens the door to the final tournament, beams of light spill into the hallway. In fact, this chapter opens with another shot of the city, but this time at the break of dawn. Surely a portent of victory for the land of the rising sun. Hello, my name is Sean, and there's little I enjoy as much as unpacking visual symbolism. Also, if you like what I do, consider signing up to my Patreon. For one, you'll help me cover channel-related expenses, but on top of that, you also gain access to my podcast where I give my first thoughts on a new Blue Lock chapter every single week. Blue Lock is by far the most poetic shonen manga I've ever encountered. From its earliest chapters, it employs recurrent imagery and metaphors like fire, heroism, and hunger as foundational pillars for its overarching philosophy. And for what it's worth, I've talked about all these metaphors at length in previous videos. But what I love about Blue Lock's use of imagery is that it begins with relatively straightforward images, but then transforms and interrogates them in really fascinating ways. So for this video, I want to trace this process for another series of recurrent imagery: light and darkness. Let's start with the very basics. Our protagonist, Yoichi Isagi, has been associated with light since the start of the first selection. When all seems lost in the match against Team X, Isagi and Bachira endeavour to change their Team 0 into 1, and by doing so become the light that will lead to victory in the next match. But right then, Barou stops Isagi in his tracks. And have a look at how this moment is depicted. Barou is obscured by a veil of shadows, his figure barely visible underneath the blackness. In other words, Isagi's faint flicker is violently snuffed out by the pitch black void blocking his way. That's how far off he's from embodying his ideal as a striker. By the way, and this is a bit of an aside, but this match reveals some really interesting insights into understanding Kaneshiro's priorities as a writer. In the second selection, Barou's character-defining trait is his refusal to pass, as a manifestation of his insistence on scoring every goal himself. However, Barou's unwillingness to pass or assist turns out to be a bit of a retcon. In his first appearance in the story, he actually passes when he's covered by Team Z and gladly relinquishes a goal to his teammates. On the other hand, however, the light versus dark dichotomy, which, as we'll see in this video, is a defining feature of the Isagi-Barou rivalry, is present from Barou's very first appearance. This is what I mean when I say that Blue Lock is an extraordinarily poetic manga. Kaneshiro is an author who thinks in metaphors and images, and he relies on these as the foundations of his themes and character writing. That being a good segue, I think, to move to the second selection, since here the light versus darkness dichotomy between Isagi and Barou is truly brought to the fore. When Isagi tries to establish a mutually reciprocal relationship with Barou, he says something really interesting. Barou's exceptional abilities could shine even brighter alongside Isagi. That's the point at which Barou breaks down the negotiations, in a moment that anticipates how light versus dark serves as the upcoming match's central metaphor. Given that Barou is a creature of darkness, it's no wonder that he's repulsed by the notion of basking in Isagi's radiance. So let's turn to the match proper. The turning point for Isagi's team arrives once he stops expecting Barou to change his ways. And in the very next play, Isagi exploits how everyone directed their attention to Barou by, in Nagi's words, slicing through the darkness. In figurative terms, Isagi makes a comeback by using Barou's darkness to his advantage and changing it into light. That is what it means to devour another player. Isagi subsumes everything that Barou represents to paint the pitch in his own colours. Now, as Isagi transforms into the dominant player of the field, he transfuses his brightness into the entire space around him. In Barou's words, the field is shining for one of Isagi's goals. And as Barou's teammates show him a path forward, he finds himself bedazzled by the brightness of their light. Here we witness the true encapsulation of a player being devoured, demoted to the role of supporting actor. If he lets himself be subsumed by Isagi's light, Barou risks the complete and utter erasure of his very identity. The darkness that defies him will be scorched away by Isagi's relentless rays of illumination. However, at the very end of the match, Barou decides to defy Isagi once more, and he does so by overturning the dominant image. He exploits Isagi's radiance by hiding in his teammates' shadows. Here, Barou comes into his own as a denizen of the shadows. He creates pockets of darkness within the blinding light. And if Isagi and Barou's chemical reaction consists of them mutually devouring each other, the manga underscores this dynamic by coupling it to a highly apt metaphor. After all, light cannot exist without darkness. Okay, so for the purpose of this video, I'm going to skip over Isagi's ball lighting up when he uses Barou as bait in the 4v4, or Barou saying that Isagi's light is his favourite food in the U20 match. From here on, I want to explore the macro implications of the light and darkness imagery. After all, well-written stories don't sprinkle in metaphors at random. So if Blue Lock places repeated emphasis on this figurative domain, we should expect that it serves a greater purpose than just establishing a neat little contrast between Isagi and Barou. Let me start with a maybe more straightforward example of what I mean by this. Hunger is one of the most overt metaphors throughout the story. Echo whets the appetite of the Blue Lock candidates by literally subjecting them to starvation, strikers vie for dominance by devouring each other, etc, etc. I actually made an entire video on this topic in case you're interested. So why is this edgy football comic so interested in our appetites? It's because Blue Lock posits as its central conceit that we can only attain true fulfillment by obeying our latent desires, our egos. And so, hunger figures prominently throughout the story as the best age-appropriate example of our base instincts. Put differently, in the world of Blue Lock, the answer to the meaning of life can be found within the depths of our own psyche, and thereby, the path towards spiritual self-realization involves becoming more closely attuned to our primal desires, those which supersede all culturally acquired norms. And here, hunger serves as a first step of the process, as the most immediately recognizable of our natural desires. In other words, the idea of developing a figurative hunger for goals is a powerful metaphor within a story that advocates for the uncompromising pursuit of one's desires. That brings me back to the connection between Isagi and light, because it takes much longer for the story to unveil the full significance of this imagery. For this, I need to turn to the Ubers match, where the true vision finally becomes manifest. And just to be transparent, this discussion will retread some familiar ground from my Ubers and NEL analyses. But in any case, given what I discussed earlier, it's not surprising that the importance of light resurfaces in the context of Isagi facing off against Barou once more. In fact, the spread of Barou outmaneuvering Isagi to score his second goal sees him plunging the world into darkness. This is how Barou asserts his supreme dominance over the field. He dyes the entire page in his own colours. Yet, the imagery of light and dark in the Ubers match goes far beyond the rivalry between Isagi and Barou. For one, the flashback to Hiyori's pivotal meeting with Karas takes place against the backdrop of the rising sun. And the manga returns to this one scene on two other occasions, as if it's trying to imprint this singular image in our minds. Secondly, the flashback to Mick and Snuffy's glory days sees them driving towards the horizon, again at the break of dawn. I probably don't need to spell out the basic significance of daybreak. It stands for a new beginning, a fresh start. In Hiyori's case, This marks the first time he hears that he's allowed to pursue his own desires instead of living to fulfill the expectations of others. In other words, his meeting with Karas plants the seed for him to eventually be reborn as a true egoist. However, I find the other scene even more relevant for our purposes. In particular, let's examine what the figure of Mick stands for within the match, and arguably the story as a whole. Mick Moon is a revolutionary at heart, a striker with an ardent desire to breathe new life into the world. And in the eye of Mick's tempestuous ambitions stand the shitty brats who dare defy those wise adults who do things the right way. Thus he declares as he ventures towards the rising sun, he won't stop vying to become king of the world until he exhales his dying breath. Right here, the manga spells out the true significance of sunrise. The break of dawn represents the birth of a new era, the upending of the established order. And while Mick proved unable to bring his desires into fruition, his ambitions are set to be realized by the end of the story. After all, the founders of the Blue Lock program breathed the exact same revolutionary ethos, a deep-held desire to rejuvenate the world of football. And for this purpose, they've placed all their hopes and dreams on a rabble of shitty brats. But let's zoom out a bit, because the Mick and Snuffy storyline forms an integral aspect of the Ubers match's thematic messaging. Within the dramatic framework of the NEL, Bastard München's third outing represents the moment where Isagi finally secures a decisive victory and establishes himself as the center of his team. However, I want to highlight one ongoing thread in particular: Hiyori's belief that he holds the key to making Isagi the world's best striker. So, on the one hand, the finale of the Ubers match is about Hiyori discovering his true desires and how to assert himself within a team of egoists. Yet, if the winning goal demarcates the moment where Hiyori realizes his desire to produce the world's best, we're conversely meant to understand that it also represents Isagi's first step to securing his place as number one. So, this is where things get interesting. When Hiyori commits to open the key to the world's best out of his own volition, we see beams of light radiating from his eye as he gazes towards Isagi. Right here, he understands deep within his heart that he's about to alter the course of history. And what he utters is nothing less than a declaration of revolution. Hiyori has gone from being a passive bystander to actively creating this new dawn. That's the essence of his character arc over the course of the match. Put differently, the Ubers match segues from a revolutionary who ultimately failed to realize his ambitions to the emergence of the world's best striker, the one who will take up Mick's mantle and change the world forever. This connection is reinforced through the persistent focus on light throughout the Ubers match, and at its culmination, the ball gets enveloped in blinding rays of light, with Isagi's shot dispersing the darkness. With this, we can now finally understand the full significance of the scene where Isagi departs to the U20 World Cup. When our protagonist is greeted by the morning sun, it signifies a new dawn for Japanese football. The revolution is nigh. And as I hinted at the start of the video, I do believe that sunrise carries additional significance in the context of an international sports competition, given that the sun is Japan's most prominent national symbol. The idea that the U20 World Cup revolves around Japan bringing about a new dawn is reinforced even further in the first match of the tournament. I discussed this in full detail in my full analysis of the Nigeria match, but Onazi is basically the first true alternative hero in the story, his saves being ripped almost straight from the pages of a superhero comic. But more importantly for the purposes of this video, he's repeatedly characterized as Nigeria's shining hope. In fact, the Japanese makes the light imagery even more explicit. He's nicknamed Ruminasu, luminous, which is accompanied by Gikun reading Hibo no Hikari, light of hope. In other words, in the first outing of an arc about giving rise to a new dawn, Isagi measures up against another luminary, another ray of light for an upcoming nation. This association between Onazi and light is drawn even more explicitly towards the end of the match, in 2 chapters conspicuously titled Light of Hope and Afterglow. Here, we see Isagi coming in with the press to stop this, in his words, shining bastard. But then, Onazi undergoes a last-minute awakening, which is figurized by rays of light beaming forth from the ball. Right here, Nigeria's ace is about to emerge as the beacon of light for his nation. Except that he ultimately fails to overcome the final wall for Nigerian football to be reborn. Moreover, the Nigeria match features one scene in particular that brings the ongoing light metaphors into contact with ideas about our deepest primal desires. When Ego describes football as the modern-day counterpart to prehistoric hunting practices, we witness this scene of Onazi figurized as a Neolithic hunter, against the backdrop of a rising sun. The manga suggests that in primitive times, hunters were revered because they ensured the survival of our species. They were the heroes that brought about the dawn of mankind, and without their efforts, we would have never seen the light of day. And by implication, the contest between competing heroes in the U20 World Cup represents the direct continuation of our predecessors' endeavours. Just like prehistoric hunters, Nigeria's shining hope is fighting to bring about a new dawn. That brings me to the aftermath of the match. In the final send-off between Isagi and Onazi, the page centers on the fiery glow around their fists. Isagi has lit another hero's fire, their fierce kindle illuminating the darkness. At the start of the video, I talked about the symbolism behind the transition from night to day in the anticipation of the U20 World Cup. From Ego toiling in the dead of night to Isagi leaving at the break of dawn. Interestingly enough, we get analogous symbolism in the more recent interaction between the two. At the end of the Nigeria match, Isagi claims that he has now transcended Ego's philosophy. He has figuratively risen to greater heights than his master and set his sights on what comes above. And this is figurized in a highly symbolic gesture by Ego inviting his protege into a lift and granting him the privilege to stand on top of everything he has built, with a view of the heavens above. This chapter gives us our first deeper insight into Ego as a person, his past and his accompanying vulnerabilities. And once again, the framing of this scene creates an association between Ego and night. Blue Lock's mastermind has languished in obscurity. As a player, he ultimately failed to see the light of day and is now fated to labor in the shadows. But then we get the passing of the torch, with Isagi declaring that he'll go and meet the gods that abandoned his mentor. And right when we see Isagi declare that he will achieve what Ego could not, we see a fallen star gleaming in the dead of night. The darkness is dispersed by a glimmer of light. One final note before I wrap up the video. I mentioned earlier how Onazi represents an alternative source of light to Isagi, as it were. Interestingly enough, this pattern continues into the second match of the U20 World Cup, and I don't think this is a coincidence. After all, France is repeatedly characterized as the strongest team, the favourites to win the World Cup. The manga underscores this even further by also consistently associating Julien Loki, the French ace, with light. In Loki's case, however, for a very different reason. It signifies that he virtually runs at the speed of light. Moreover, the manga elevates the French striker's association with light to almost cosmic proportions. Throughout the France match, Loki's most distinguishing feature is his natural suitability for being the number one. His innate abilities render it virtually inevitable for him to become the world's best, as if the heavens themselves are shining upon him. In other words, if the U20 World Cup is a competition to bring about a new dawn, Japan's most dangerous competitor also lays a strong claim on this metaphorical domain. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. I'm almost certain that the manga will expand even further upon the association between Loki and light somewhere down the line, so there will be plenty for me to talk about in the future. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the topic, so do hit me up in the comments. But before I let you go, I want to shout out the kind folks who helped me keep the lights on. My €10 patrons. Alex Mackay, JKI, Liam Dunseith, Melody, and Orangey Legend. And until next time, Slán go fóill.